Thank you everyone for joining me. My name's Sam Cavender and I work for the Diocese of Gloucester. Could we just go round and if you could just introduce yourselves, if that's all right. So can we start with Sarah Bick?
Hi, I'm Sarah Bick. I'm the parish priest in the Mid-Wydene Churches parish in the Forest of Dean, which is centred around Colford and some of the surrounding villages. I've been here for 10 years as curate and vicar. And part of one of the reasons why I'm part of this conversation is that I had to take the community through a church closure experience.
Cool, thank you, Sarah. Jo?
Hi, I'm Jo Weatherall. I'm the Children and Families Officer for the Diocese of Gloucester. My background is, for 25 years, I was an early years practitioner. I was ordained in 2015 and was a parish priest in rural Hertfordshire for 6 years. So my current role is where my two passions come together.
Great, thank you. Ruth?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ruth. I'm currently vicar of St Paul and St Stephen's Church in the middle of Gloucester, about a mile away from the cathedral. But previous to that, I was a primary school teacher for 10 years and a social worker specialising in working with children and families going through court processes.
Amazing. And finally, Neil.
Hi, yeah, I'm Neil Bennett and I run a little charity called the Worship Foundation, and we coach, mentor, teach, train contemporary worship leaders and worship pastors, in particularly working with the diocese, developing contemporary worship in this region.
Great. Thank you. So this conversation is going to be about lament, about the topic of lament. Talking to a friend recently, they said that we as a society are very good at lament, and you can just look at Twitter to get the idea that that's the case. But I think lament and cynicism are different things. And I think personally, I think I'm not very good at lament, and I think society's not very good at it. I think we don't understand it. So this conversation began out of something that Jo Weatherall mentioned. So Jo, could you set the context for us of why lament?
Yes, in conversation with a friend recently, we were talking about how as church we always really keen to say that our job is to provide hope and to help people walk in the light. And recent experiences in my own life made me say, actually, that's not what I need right now. I don't need someone to say, look, here's the light. I need someone to tell me that God is going to sit with me in the dark, that actually it's an okay place to be, and that recognizing that praise and lament go hand in hand, that just because we're acknowledging that this is a dark time doesn't mean that God isn't with us and we're not acknowledging God's presence, but actually we are just acknowledging the truth about where we are here and now, and that sometimes it stinks.
Yeah, does anyone else want to add to that?
I think I'm absolutely would second what Jo says, because I can remember a friend of mine, she went through breast cancer, and she came to church on Easter Sunday when I was a curate, and she came with her drip, having just had an operation. And I can remember, the whole church, singing Alleluias, and the Gloria was all back in, and it was all about resurrection. And I just remember her saying, thank you for the service, but I'm really not in the place where I can say Alleluia at all at the moment. And I need to know that you are with me in that place too. And that's always really struck me. And I think my personal experience of God as well, through some of the things I've been through in my life and the dark times, have been that when we don't lament, when we don't acknowledge that the dark is dark, and we pretend that, oh, it's okay, we can just be hopeful and Jesus is the light of the world and everything will be all right. Actually, that's when mental health issues creep in, and you find that the issues then become much more long-term for people if they haven't had that chance to lament. And so, in parish ministry, I know people who will skip right through the bereavement process because they want to get back to normal, and that's obviously, human. But actually, if you don't sit with the grief even for a little bit, it will come back and bite you even 30 years later. And I see that every day, and I just think we don't do lament. No, we do blame and we do cynicism, but we don't do blame. We don't do lament.
Yeah. What is lament then? What sets it apart? What's it? I mean, you've set the ground there, but why? How could you, as a church, start answering that question? What is it?
I think one thing about that I was just picking up from when Ruth was speaking is that actually Jesus is light, Jesus is hope, but Jesus is truth as well. And we have to speak the truth. So when things are difficult, when things are dark, then we have to speak the truth of that as part of a cycle of healing. And if we don't do that properly, then we actually prevent the rest of that cycle from happening. And in that sense, it's almost a prophetic thing. And you do pick that up from the Old Testament, that some of the characters, like Jeremiah, for example, is the kind of classic one, as someone who will speak that truth for a community, is actually doing a service of healing for that community, is a part of the process that's essential, is to speak that truth. And that makes it a prophetic act.
One of the most helpful introductions to lament for me was when someone said, lament starts when you ask the question why and you don't get an answer. I think particularly in my stream of the church, we like to have the answers. We like certainty. Most of our leadership culture is around being certain and clear and clarity and saying where things are going. And actually this time that we're going through is one where we literally don't have the answers. We're not sure what the outcome is going to be. And this is a real challenge to a lot of the church, where we love to have those answers. So lament starts with me in asking that question, asking questions and not getting an answer. And I think I've been reflecting on this quite a lot. It doesn't seem to me that those of us with faith are any less susceptible to what's going on at the moment than those with faith. And that's a big challenge for us, to be real and vulnerable in a way that maybe we don't like being. If you're going to lament as a church, you've got to stand up in your congregation and say that we don't have the answers here, and to be okay with that.
From my perspective as a children and families officer, advisor, if you like, one of the things that I recognise is that with our children, when they're very small, we spend a long time teaching them to walk and encouraging them to walk. We encourage them first to pull themselves up to standing and enjoy it as they start to cruise around the furniture. And we will put our fingers out so that we can hold both hands and help them take those early steps. We teach them to walk, but we don't then move that on as they get older and help them to walk in the dark. We actually encourage them to think of light and dark as really binary things, that the light is good and the dark is bad, rather than just sort of sitting with them as we would sit with an adult and help them to deal with disappointment, with grief, with failure. We don't necessarily listen to their lamenting because we try and cheer them up all the time. And yes, childhood should be joyful. It should be about discovery and it should be about awe and wonder. But children are not just one level of emotion. They know all about it and they stamp their feet and they get cross when things go wrong. And we should be there and allow our children to do that as well.
But it is about permission, I think, isn't it? And it is about allowing. If I had £1 for every time I've gone and visited a funeral family and they've said to me, I'm sorry for crying, I'd be rich. And every time I sit there and I say to them, please don't apologise for crying. This is your mum, your sister, your husband, your wife, your auntie, whoever it happens to be. and sometimes even your child.
Yeah.
Why would you not be crying? Why do you think that you shouldn't cry in front of me, in front of the vicar? And we keep grief hidden, and we make it a private event, rather than saying, actually, you might not be able to cry yet, but when you're ready, then it's fine and it's part of normal life. And giving people permission to say that. And we've seen during lockdown, with people unable to come to funerals, unable to say goodbye properly to their loved ones, how much that is now impacting upon them in their daily life. And All Souls this year, we won't be able to do an All Souls service as we have done. We can't pack the church with 250 people. But finding things that people can come and be part of, that then just allow them, just even briefly, a moment to remember and to grieve, is going to be really vitally important. And it is about permission and allowing people to grieve and to cry in public if that's what they need to do.
That's quite a practical way in for people in services or whatever, to have that permission moment and say, now's the time. And it is normal to feel like this. Is that how you would approach it, to move from that? Because at the beginning we were talking about it in quite an abstract way. This is an important thing, but actually you there touched on how you'd actually say, how would you enable it beyond saying it's all right, you don't need to apologise, it's okay to feel this way.
I suppose we usually enable it through the funeral ministry that we give and the pastoral care, which then we follow up with other services in church, usually in some symbolic way. So lighting a candle within a service. This year we're probably going to build some sort of cairn or stone cross in the churchyard, where people can bring their own stones with the names of those people on and place, together to gather. Because I think there's also something about collective grief as well, which we need to address at the moment.
Yeah.
I led worship. I was a worship pastor for 20 years. I think I led worship 2,500 times, and not one of those was a time of lament. So, for lots of us, this will be a time of taking a few risks and trying a few things and having permission to fail. But I think for the health of not just the church, the health of the nation, this is something we need to think carefully around. Otherwise, that grief will store up, and will it find it get expressed in all sorts of unhealthy ways.
I think my experience of going through a church closure that I mentioned earlier, it was quite interesting, the dynamic between the grief and the need for lament for the regular worshipping community, and also the grief that there was amongst the wider community that just expect the church to be there, whether they attend or not. And actually managing that dynamic between those two things was quite an interesting challenge. And I think we've got something like that now. We have got the need of the wider community to express that sort of general sense of loss that we've got a corporate sense of now, but also for individuals, there will be an individual reasons for their particular sense of what they're experiencing at the moment. And we have got our worshipping community, for whom worship, as Neil was just saying, is limited at the moment, and there's a sense of loss simply in that as well. How do we express our worship at the moment too? Just on the practical thing that Sam was asking about just now, I think in that sense of regular worship rather than simply in funeral ministry, I think we can use certain moments in the service in particular ways. Particularly the confession section, the intercession section, where instead of always trying to throw the light on those bits, we can dwell a bit more in the darkness in those parts of the services. I think that is something we could do in a practical level at the moment. But that idea Ruth just gave earlier of building that cairn, around All Souls, that's a wonderful practical idea. That's a visible thing that a whole community would be able to see. So we could do that around All Souls, but maybe we need to think of opportunities at other times. We need to think carefully about what we do around Christmas this year. And so perhaps we need to just generate invite some ideas about how we do this for our community. I know there are some places that have always done a blue Christmas service for those people that find Christmas a difficult time anyway. Everyone around is being forcefully joyful, and some people find that extremely difficult. So there is experience out there of creating community lament. Perhaps we just need a way of bringing it together.
One of the things that I've been exploring with my colleague Debbie from our education department is a language of spirituality to share in schools, not just so that the children can grasp it, but also the adults working with them. So we talk about the ows and the wows and the nows of spirituality. You know, often we encourage people to look for God in the highs and lows of life. But what about just the everyday? So one way of enabling lament is that ancient practice of just spending time reviewing your day and looking for where you might have discovered the presence of God. And it might not have been necessarily in highs and lows. And goodness knows not every day has particular highs and lows. A lot of days are just now and ordinary. And so just recovering that experience of God within the ordinary and the everyday is a really important part, and perhaps also part of enabling us to lament. Neil, you were talking about rediscovering the Psalms, and I mean they're absolutely full of lament, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually one of my friends, you may have heard of Brian Dirksen, some of his songs, Come Now It's Time to Worship, and those are his most popular ones, but actually he's been spending the last few years rewriting the Psalms, because he felt that particularly in sort of my community, we'd lost that art, we'd lost the value of the Psalms and lament, and he actually got quite a lot of stick from it, and now he's like, I just think, oh, what a brave person to go against all the stick he got for rewriting Psalms of Lament, and now people are going, oh yeah, I get it. Mm-hmm. And so if you're looking for a resource, look out for the Shire Poets, which is Brian Dirksen's Psalms of Lament.
Thank you. Can I ask you all, so we've looked a bit about what and why, and a little bit about the practical side of it, in a group setting. Can I ask you, as individuals, how do you lament? I want to learn from all of you, really. Is that answerable? Neil, should we start with you?
Yeah, you can do. I have to say, I've got no credibility in this whatsoever. As I say, 2,500 times leading worship, never led a time of lament. But for me, at the moment, is quite a personal journey of reflection, and so yeah, I've got very little experience, but I'm just beginning to learn of its value. So sorry, I haven't got much to say.
I know that's a good answer. It's an honest answer. That's helpful. Joe?
I think possibly we are all a little bit where Neil is. For myself, I've just read Barbara Brown Taylor's book, Learning to Walk in the Dark, and that has really enabled me to kind of embrace something about celebrating darkness, actually, and that it's okay to spend some time in the dark and discover actually the beauty of darkness, and that actually you find a different way of looking at things, because dark doesn't make things invisible, it just gives them a different perspective, and actually learning not to be afraid of it, and comfortable sitting with pain and sorrow.
Yeah, I think a lot of this does seem like there's that a lot of societal tendencies do are rooted in fear, and perhaps we're guilty of that in our inability to lament, which is such an established Old Testament thing, and we're guilty of some fear. It's easier to not do it. And honestly, talking with you guys about it, I'd rather not, and I'd rather not learn about it. I'd rather avoid lamenting for the rest of my life. That's the truth.
I think we all would.
Yeah.
we all aspire to live happily ever after, don't we? But as we all know, life doesn't go to plan. It has its ups and downs, and what faith gives you is the knowledge that even in the down, even when God feels really absent, we know that God is still there. I mean, personally, for me, yeah, I've spent a long time refusing to look at some of the grief things in my life, and last year plucked up enough courage, mainly because something else happened that left me floundering in my life. Plucked up enough courage to go and get some counselling, to actually start to unravel, to peel off the layers that I had just put over the top, which had enabled me to keep going in life, and and got through, and as I said, was a primary school teacher and a social worker, and then was ordained, and it all seemed and looked really relatively successful. And yet there was so much underneath that went right back to things that I had so much fear about looking at, because of my part in some of the hurt that had been played out, but also because there were things that I didn't really understand. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. But what I really realised was that I could have been a lot more, I was going to say a lot more happier, but maybe not happy, content and at peace if I'd done that sooner in my life. And, and sometimes on any given day, sometimes I just need to take half an hour to sit in the corner and cry. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but sometimes that's what you've got to do, because the world is a massive mess, as Neil just said. There's a huge amount of loss for people on every kind of level. And if we don't sit and cry about it, then I think that gives you just a bit of time, a bit of emotion, getting rid of that emotion, that then enables you to literally dust yourself off, get back up, take a deep breath, and carry on with God.
Can we just ask Sarah, what about your personal approach to it?
Yeah, again, I'm not as good as it probably as I should be. I think temperamentally people are different, and I'm always that kind of, okay, this has happened. What can I do now to make this better next time? And I do have that tendency to kind of skip over the lament a bit. One of my personal experiences was, I do now have a little boy, Isaac, he's 3 years old, but it was a long time coming for that successful pregnancy to happen. And I had lots of very early losses, and then I had a pregnancy that lasted for 10 weeks before a loss. And that was a devastating experience after 10, 11 years of trying for a baby. But I did find I just needed to keep still. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't think very much. It was in the summer, so I was able just to sit in the garden and just kind of be quiet, acknowledge God's presence with me, but just be thankful that he wasn't expecting me to do anything, respond in any way that I wasn't ready for, but just to be still with God. And although it was lovely and sunny in the garden, so it wasn't literally dark, it was obviously an emotionally dark place. But then that did give me the platform to stand on, to then think, okay, what do I do about this? Is there anything I can do about this going forward? But if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't spent that time of resisting my natural urge to just, okay, how do we fix it? If I hadn't spent that time, then I wouldn't have had the safe place to stand to go on afterwards.
I think that's right, and that plays into the earlier thing we were talking about. Joe was touching on contemplation earlier as well, and Watchman Nee wrote sit, walk, stand, and everything begins with sit. It's like we're designed to be with God, and if we kind of can't begin until we get that platform right. And I think you just explained that really well. Thank you, Sarah.
I think that's one of the griefs of this time, not having the churches open all the time. Our church was always open between 8:30 and 5:30 every day. And the amount of people who would just go in there that we didn't see or didn't know about, but then people would say, you know, I've had people come and say to me, your church saved my life, and that was because it was open and I was able to go in and be with God. And we can say it's not about the building. God is everywhere. You can find God in the garden or, you know, wherever. It's not about the church building. But for many, many people, it is about the church building. And we have to recognise that. And that was probably the thing that saved my life when I had postnatal depression after my youngest son, was sitting in the cathedral and just sitting, like Sarah said, just sitting still with God and with him in his pushchair next to me. But if I hadn't done that, if that building hadn't been open for me to do that, I don't know what would have become of me or him, quite frankly.
I think that's my experience as well. Jo, you were going to say something.
Yeah, David Runcorn asks a really important question, which is, tell me about your tears. And I think that's something that God asks us. I think God asks us that question all the time. And you could probably expand that in terms of lament to say, tell me about your tears, tell me about your fears, tell me about those times when you really need courage, because these are all things that we believe are aspects of who God is and where we can tap into them through the Spirit of God. And so, yeah, part of lament is, as Sarah and Ruth have said, is just taking that time to just rest in God's presence and allow those questions, and then be content, as Neil has said, to sit with the fact that you might not get the answers in a direct way, but actually probably the answers lie within us. If we give ourselves that space to ask the questions, that's probably the first step.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. We've had a good 25 minutes there, so I think we need to tie it up. Thank you all for taking the time to talk to me about it. I found it really helpful, and I don't even run a church, so cheers. We'll end it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Take care. Bye bye.